was one of the younger members of the Dillon family. He and his brother were being groomed to take over management of the entire chain when the family matriarch, Susanna Dillon, retired. He was only 21, so he worked next to me in the kitchen a few times a week. It took us several weeks before our interactions became familiar and comfortable. Patrick was a sports fan. His favorite team was the Indianapolis Colts. I had not been to or seen a football game in several years and did not enjoy his lengthy free-form diatribes about their strategies in upcoming games. Patrick spent 2 years at Purdue University studying civil engineering before dropping out to help with the non-fried chicken business. When the subject of my upcoming college education came up, he related his own unfortunate experience. I had high aspirations of leaving the watchful eye of my parents to enjoy some healthy, youthful philandering and drinking. He spent his 2 years of college locked in a dorm room with his civil engineering books. The only relief from his loneliness was a friend who lived on the other side of the campus. I listened sympathetically to his stories about the games that he attended by himself or his unsuccessful attempts to create friendships with the beer-guzzling electrical engineering crowd. Meeting a girl in Indianapolis was all the impetus he needed to drop out of school and start disemboweling chickens. I had not seen many girls my own age since I started working at the chicken restaurant. The Gap acted as a strange epicenter for any attractive gals in the area, and the chicken restaurant was located well away in a remote outer strip mall. Not surprisingly, our menu attracted patrons who frequented the Elks Lodge or Senior Center rather than those cruising the mall for prospective prom dates. The shops located near us were all useful businesses, but not the type that attracted window shoppers. My chicken skinning job was like watching a porno compared to working at mailboxes, etc., waterbed warehouse, or the picture framing businesses that surrounded us. A popular Chinese restaurant a few stores away had a staff that was still struggling with a mastery of basic English. We bartered our southern cuisine for their sweet rolls and spicy Szechuan dishes in the alley behind the restaurant. Our conversations consisted mostly of smiles, nods, and primitive hand gestures. The one business on the block that had any potential for real social interaction was the franchised frozen yogurt restaurant on the corner. My coworkers depicted TCBY as an exclusive singles bar run by ravishing nymphomaniacs. "Man, you should see the foxes that they got in that place," said Terrence. "Serving frozen yogurt would be a dream come true for any man." Fred, this guy I know that used to work there, he told me that it was non-stop action after work. You hear me? Non-stop. I found that a few members of the Dillon family worked at TCBY. The Dillons had connections through second cousins or other relations at almost every business in the strip mall. The Kennedys had a large extended family at their Bayside compound in Martha's Vineyard. The Bushes vacationed with their second and third cousins at an exclusive coastal area in Maine called Kennebunkport. Not to be outdone, the Dillons, one of Bedford, Indiana's first families, spread their rotund relations throughout the franchised businesses of the Castleton Farm Strip Mall. Having met a good cross-section of the Dillon family, I had a hard time imagining the TCBY bloodline to be as promising as it was described. I needed to see for myself. During a lunch break, I decided to make a reconnaissance run for a cone of the new coffee-flavored frozen yogurt. 2 teenage girls were working the counter as I entered the store. They had dark hair and were both within what would be considered a normal weight range by Dillon family standards. One of the girls, Shauna, was a second cousin of the Dillons. She was only 14 and constantly giggled as she handed me my order. The other girl, Brenda, had no genetic bond with the Dillons. She and Shauna shared a similar personality, though, despite the 4 years separating them. I introduced myself, collected my cone, and walked back to my restaurant. I had seen Shauna a few times before at the chicken restaurant, but had not realized that she was part of the TCBY dating pool. She was a fanatic New Kids on the Block fan, and she came to the restaurant to exchange anecdotes and posters of her idols with Stanley, a boy my own age who worked the counter. Stanley kept an impeccably clean restaurant. He wore a tight uniform that was spotless, while mine looked like I had been rolling in the ingredients. I naively assumed that he and Shauna had some type of relationship. Despite our protests, he was constantly showing Terrence and me glossy magazines with full-page photos of his teenage idols. Stanley and I only had one disagreement. He would commandeer the little radio at the chicken skinning station during his breaks. While we were occupied, our Public Enemy tape would be removed and replaced with the painful bubblegum pop vocals of Stanley's New Kids. The majority of the employees at Bubba's understood that the radio in the back, by any account, was the property of the Skinners and Cooks. We were not required to interact with the general public. Left with only our recently thawed birds and each other for company, the radio helped pass the time. Terrence and I would often return from our breaks to find Stanley mastering New Kids choreography with our radio. Stanley seemed to think that we did not like this band because we had never really listened to any of their lyrics. When Terrence would remove Stanley's New Kid tape, he would register a whiny, high-pitched protest. "You didn't really listen to that song. These songs have meant so much to me. I just know when you hear this next one, you'll see what I'm saying. You should go to one of their concerts. Everyone's screaming, and they are such talented performers." We were respectful of Stanley's opinion. Actually, I was a little afraid to upset him. Stanley seemed sensitive, and I thought that Todd was always a little too hard on him. I had seen Stanley in the corner by the walk-in freezer, holding back the tears a few times when Todd reprimanded him too harshly. I did not want to upset Stanley, so I always politely agreed with Stanley when Stanley would voice his undying admiration. I certainly never wanted to attend a New Kids concert, and I was sure Terrence would not be caught dead at one. I could not imagine Terrence clapping his hands wildly, sandwiched between throngs of 14-year-old girls as the New Kids sang their latest hit. I had seen New Kids on the Block footage on television. I was quite sure the crowd did not contain any young black men with well-lubricated pompadours. I think it would scare the hell out of the white Midwestern parents who had chaperoned squealing packs of 15-year-olds like Montana Wranglers caught in a stampede. It took me a few weeks to discover how truly sordid the inter-office relationships at Barnyard Bubba's actually were. 17-year-old Stanley and Shauna maintained an innocent platonic friendship, bonded by a love of overly choreographed one-hit wonders. Shauna's heart belonged to someone else. One day, while hauling a box of Fat and Grizzle, I stumbled upon a horrific scene. Afternoon talk shows could not be more salacious. 22-year-old Patrick and his 14-year-old second cousin were embraced in what can only be described as a tender moment. I'm not sure about the legal or genetic ramifications of this romance, but I had seen enough. It turned out the majority of the workers at Bubba's were well aware of this, as was the Dillon family. I'm not sure about rural Indiana, but here in the big city of Indianapolis, this cannot be considered right. I made two decisions at that point. First, I would make every effort to change the subject whenever the skinning table conversation turned to Patrick's romance. Secondly, I would make a hell of a lot of noise when taking out the trash. I was glad I discovered this affair when I did. By this time, I only had 3 weeks left at Barnyard Bubba's before leaving for Wyoming to start college at an outdoor school. I enjoyed the company of my coworkers and the challenges of my trade. My skills were starting to improve. I figured I still had at least 6 months before I attained Terrence's fanatical speed. I admired Terence, not only for his skills at the skinning table, but for the way that he could dance to the hip hop and funk music that came from the little radio. While my own jerky Caucasian movements elicited groans and smiles from Terence, he moved with a rhythmic grace that I could only admire. I was depressed after going to a predominantly black dance club a few weeks prior. I stood against the wall, ogling the girls who walked past me. The crowd consisted mostly of young black men dancing with white, Hispanic, or Asian girls. I made the mistake of asking a beautiful Filipino girl in a miniskirt out onto the dance floor. This decision did not seem well planned, as I had virtually no ability to carry a beat, in spite of my time in the trumpet section of the high school band. Strangely, this did not seem to help. I cringe, even today, to think of the look on my partner's face when she realized the tragic error of her judgment. Terence decided that I was going to need some help before he turned me loose on a college campus. It was his opinion that my atrocious lack of rhythm could not simply be written off to a middle-class suburban upbringing. He told me to pick him up on Thursday. I believed that there was little chance of reversing what I saw as a profoundly accurate stereotype of suburban America. Terence, however, was convinced that he could help me. We went back to my house in the suburbs, and Terence produced a variety of tapes that he thought would help with my education. He concluded that we were faced with two major problems. First, like many people, I danced with an assumption that I would never be able to move like the kids who dominated the hip-hop and house tracks at the club. I did not have the brazen confidence and reckless abandonment that would allow me to make a few mistakes while on my way to ruling the debaucherous dance floors of central Indiana. Secondly, my whole concept of dancing was colored by my misconception that people dance to the words and the melody rather than to the rhythm. Once he figured that I'd found the beat, he explained that I simply had to move my body to it. After 2 hours, I learned to move at some level of social acceptability. I permanently left Bubba's, my friends, and poultry dismemberment a few weeks later for Lander, Wyoming. 2 months after my departure, I received a letter from Terence. He wished me well, told me about his latest catch, and included a picture of me drawn in full hip-hop gear climbing a mountain. He managed to put his entire letter into an inventive timing scheme that turned it into more of a rap when read aloud. That winter, I started at Indiana University. I forgot about Terence's lessons as I jumped wholeheartedly into my Midwestern college experience. A few weeks into the semester, my high school friends invited me to a party. The stereo played a variety of Prince, Public Enemy, NWA, and Too Short. Most of the other freshman boys stood around in small groups talking amongst themselves.